All right, are all y'all ready to go? Rob, are you guys ready to go online?
Yep, I think we're good.
All righty. This presentation is called the Santa Cruz Branch Prototype and Modeling Considerations. The railroad that Barbara and I, along with a cast of thousands, it seems sometimes, are building in our basement is primarily the Santa Cruz Branch. Now, there's a little bit of Northern California, and to connect it all together and to have some interchange, there is Watsonville Junction Yard, where the Southern Pacific comes in there, and there's a little bit of SP main line. We're not modeling the SP. The SP is a supporting cast. That's it. They're not the main actors. They're not even the co-stars. Okay, they're just kind of there because they got to do interchange and move stuff out of the actual branch line that we're modeling. So just kind of tuck that away in there. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, but for 4 years I lived about 2 miles from this photo. Okay, that was 6th, 7th, 8th grade in my freshman year in high school. My grandparents lived up near the end of, my grandparents on my mom's side lived up near the end of the Santa Cruz Branch as it went into the mountains. So you come out of, I'm going to show you a map here in a little bit, but just real quick overview. As you come out of Watsonville Junction, where it interchanges with the SP, you go north along Monterey Bay. When it gets to Santa Cruz, it goes 2 different ways, up along the coast and then up into the mountains, which is really what I'm more interested in modeling, kind of because, you know, I grew up there and it's gorgeous up there. And I'll show you some pictures. So we're going to do a quick overview of the prototype. We're going to talk about some history. I'm going to try not to get bogged down. This is not an NRHS meeting, so we're not going to go into all the details. And by the way, I have enough books that if I stack them one on top of the other from the floor up, you would be able to see the top of the stack above the table here, just on the Santa Cruz Branch and history in this area. We're not going to go there. We're talking about where I think the railroad is going in the future. And we're going to talk about how we think we're going to do this in HO scale. And again, we're not going to go into the nitty gritties of track plans, but just at a very high level. Well, part of the question is, what's your name? Is it the Santa Cruz Branch, the Santa Cruz Line, or the Santa Cruz Division? Depending upon which document and which railroad created the document and what time frame, what era, it could have been called any one of those 3, or even in some SP documents, all 3 of those things, referring to the exact same pieces of rail. How crazy is that? Well, it gets crazier here in a couple minutes. So we are modeling October 1981. It's a Class 3 branch line railroad, formerly the Santa Cruz Branch, Central California around Monterey Bay. So if you look at a map of California, San Francisco, you go down, you see this big half moon thing, that's Monterey Bay. And then south of that is, you know, the rest of the coast. The right-of-way is owned by the local government, and the railroad services are contracted out to be performed by a wholly owned subsidiary railroad company of a Class 1 railroad. And then it's managed by a group of local private investors. As we go through the history of this, you're going to go, well, shoot, that's kind of what's happening right now, except the wholly owned subsidiary of Class 1 railroad is really a Class 3 railroad. But yeah, it's kind of, yeah, that's what's happening. The funny thing is, I came up with this idea when I was about 15 years old. And it's kind of history, the way it is now. All right, let's move on here. So the Santa Cruz Branch is not the coastline. The daylight never ran there, but Watsonville Junction did. So we're modeling 81. By 81, 4449 was restored. So, you know, we might be running the daylight up and down through there every once in a while, but never on the branch itself, okay? Which means whoever's running the yard is going to have to deal with this thing coming in. All right. So again, here's the coast division, and there's that map. You can see San Francisco at the top. Come down a little bit. You see that big old half moon. It says Monterey Bay. And if we zoom in on it a little bit, you're going to see a little more detail. I'm going to highlight this with some overview on it. This is essentially the Santa Cruz Branch at most. Now, it has shrunk down from that, but at most, this was the Santa Cruz Branch. And I'm going to highlight it here for you. So San Francisco on the top, Pajaro, not Pajaro, Pajaro, just like it's La Jolla, not La Jolla, okay? So Pajaro on the bottom / Watsonville Junction. Pajaro is the name of the town. but on the timetables, it's Watsonville Junction. So we just call it Watsonville Junction. And it's where the SP had the junction there. There's actually a fairly large yard, still is. You see Santa Cruz, Felton, Davenport, Los Gatos. Anybody know what that means in Spanish? The cats. As you drive up Highway 17, coming across the hill into Santa Cruz, look to the right and you'll see an estate with two 12-foot high concrete cats looking out at you. Okay. And then of course, San Jose in the Santa Clara Valley. So that's pretty much what we're talking about. Originally, it was not broad gauge, but here's a schedule, and this is actually the SP schedule from way back, and you can see some of those towns that I talked about a couple of minutes ago that I might put on the Pastor Paul's Practically Perfect Pizza billboard. There's Santa Cruz, Capitola, Aptos, Watsonville, and so on and so forth. If we go back and look at history of this area, this is what we know has existed in that area I just showed you on the map. 26 historic rail lines, 17 railroads that were never built, never put a single tie, spike, rail in the ground. They were paper railroads. Some of these railroads were created on paper to prevent another railroad from advancing onto a part of the countryside. Okay? So the SP actually owns several of those paper railroads, but you weren't supposed to know the SP did, because they didn't want someone building a railroad into an area, even though they knew they would never build in there. 8 miniature railroads, and now there are 4 current rail lines in there. So just a little bit of background. Again, that's all I'm going to talk about. That we could spend, hours and hours talking about all this. I'm going to show you some pictures here of the area. So this area is known very well for strawberries, and it's known for the coastline. Gorgeous coastline. I mean, if I turn around and walk about 100 paces, I'm on the rail line here. Holy crap. The boardwalk in Santa Cruz. We're not going to model this because it takes up too much room. Okay. I would love to model this, but you know what? I need the whole basement to do this. We're not doing that. But strawberries. So these are strawberry fields before the strawberries come up. These are strawberries as they come up. And for you guys that are not in the room, I've got this box that I picked up at, well, you can't really see it. I'm trying to do it, but that's okay. That I picked up at Costco to carry our groceries out. It says Driscoll's Strawberries, Watsonville, California. 9 times out of 10, you go into Costco, Sam's, somewhere else, you pick up strawberries. Take a look at that label. It's going to say Watsonville. Sometimes it's going to say somewhere else, it's going to say Mexico or Chile or something else. But 9 times out of 10, those strawberries came from Watsonville or Watsonville area, sometimes Salinas. What did we find? What did we find for produce in Watsonville area, Watsonville Valley area there? We find salad bowl stuff. So you're going to find lettuce. You're going to find broccoli. You're going to find not too much celery. You're going to find Brussels sprouts, artichokes. It's the artichoke capital of the world right there. Garlic. The garlic festival is there as well. And on and on and on. You won't find pineapples. You won't find apples. Well, you will, but they're up in the hills. But you find all sorts of berries. So blackberries, raspberries, strawberries, and so on and so forth. A lot of produce still being moved out of here. In 81, it was being moved in big orange reefers all the time. All right. So, and anybody know what this plant is?
Artichoke.
Not even artichoke. It's Brussels sprouts. If you look really close down here, you can kind of see Brussels sprouts growing on some of those. Okay. Now see if I screwed this up so bad, I've got to do something else. Oh, yay. Anybody know what this is? This is a platform that holds water towers. So all these little farms out here, and now large farms, still have these, and they still use them to a limited degree now. They are not to water the fields. Instead, they would fill water trucks and then use the water trucks to put water on the dirt roads to keep the dirt down. You've seen them do that in the construction projects, same sort of thing. So what I'm showing you is there's some interesting architecture, some interesting little details here. Again, a lot of pampas grass, a lot of coast stuff, eucalyptus trees, eucalyptus trees, eucalyptus trees, eucalyptus trees, eucalyptus trees. If you look closely in there, you can actually see a rail line going from the bottom left to the top right. That's what we're modeling. Of course, I don't build trees, Barbara does, so she's got to figure out how to do it. Good news, Bruce Morden, a California model railroader, has actually written several trees and done clinics on it, so it's going to be easy to do. Palm trees. Yes, there are palm trees, and this is in Santa Cruz. Remember the boardwalk? That's just to the left. Okay, and then we're downtown, all sorts of trees here. Street running in Santa Cruz. And this is another part of it. Wigwags. This was taken about 5 years ago. They're still there. Guarding the rail line on some of these side streets in town. And then we're going into the woods. Woods, lots of pine, lots of other trees. But what it's really known for is redwoods. And we're talking big, tall redwoods. So big that half a dozen of us touching tip to tip around some of these would not be able to touch fingertip to fingertip going around the outside of some of these trees. They're humongous in the big trees up there. And if we built them to scale, they would be 4 foot tall. Okay, so obviously we're going to have to do some sizing on that. That's going to be a little bit tall. Bridges and bridges and bridges and bridges. Oh my, okay? There are lots of, and there have been lots of industry there. Martinelli, you guys know Martinelli sparkling apple cider, still in town. Del Mar, along with Driscoll's for packing plants and so forth. A lot of this stuff going on in there. And there's other stuff too, the stuff you'd find just about anywhere else. There are team tracks. There's Big Creek, and Big Creek has gone by at least half a dozen names that I know. At one time, it was called San Lorenzo Lumber, and there was something else. So I'll name it whatever I want to. Probably not going to be Dave's from Blackville, though, but something else. What you see here on the left is petroleum distributor. What you don't see around to the left of this in 1981 was the Anheuser-Busch distributor. So one of the last things that Exact Rail / Train Life released was those nice beer cars. I have pictures of those beer cars at that facility in 1981. So don't tell me they're wrong. Okay, and that's Highway 1 up there as well. You'll never guess. Would you believe Lipton made Snapple in this facility from the late 70s up until the early 2000s? And that building to the right, Wrigley. If you went to the store and bought something Wrigley on the West Coast, that's where it was made. So there's a lot of industry out there, a lot of cool stuff. Don't you like that wiggle in the road? Yeah. And then, of course, eventually there's an end of the line. And Roaring Camp, narrow gauge, Roaring Camp and Big Trees, narrow gauge railroad. This railroad alone could be easily a clinic by itself. And I will probably hate myself for saying that, but Mr. Dawson, someday I will do one for the NRHS, okay? What you're seeing here is 3 railroads worth of equipment here, which is kind of interesting. On the left is Progressive Rail. In the middle is, oh crap, I can't remember what it was. They don't have the contract anymore. In fact, they were going out. So on the left, they were just coming in to run the contract. In the middle is the guys that were going away. And then on the right are 2 CF7s owned by Santa Cruz Big Trees, which is part of the Roaring Camp group. Okay, they currently have the contract. So a close up. Anybody know what kind of locomotive this is? A Jeep 15, absolutely. 15-1, absolutely. Okay, CF7s. So they have 2 CF7s up on the line, and they have 2 in Watsonville itself. And yeah, okay, let's talk about shipments and loads. So a lot of stuff here. We've talked about some of these already. Gunpowder, not anymore. But during the Civil War, there was more gunpowder that came out of the hills of Santa Cruz than came anywhere else for the Union Army. What? Yeah, that was a total surprise to me when I read that. And I had to ask a couple people, and yeah, actually it is. So let's talk about a little bit of history here. Pre-1900, a lot of small railroads, you saw some of those, narrow gauge primarily. There was some broad gauge, 4 foot 8.5, but not a lot. They were competing for customers. They were competing for right-of-way, and then consolidation happened. So again, I'm going to simplify this. The Santa Cruz and Felton Railroad, now we're calling ours the railway to make a distinction here. Incorporated in 1874, not the first one. January 1875, track laying began, not the first one. October 1875, They were the first ones to run trains, and the first revenue train was actually run in October of 1875 as well. So there's a lot of history here, okay? So I'm going to do a couple of sidebars here, kind of goofy sidebars. How many of you guys know this area other than Ron? And Barbara's been up there. Okay. This is the epitome of where we would expect hippies to live. Okay. This is a hippie kind of culture. Trust me. Remember Al Sleet, the hippy dippy weatherman? Anybody remember that? This is where Al lived. Okay. Trust me. And I lived there for several years. Okay. There are some goofy things that happen out there. I love the place, but so City Santa Cruz came up with the ordinance that says you can't run steam trains down Pacific Street. Well, Pacific Street was the street they used to get from the Redwoods to the wharf. Hello? Does that mean we now have to use electric trams or electric locomotives to move our goods in and out? You're crazy. Or to move passenger trains? So Santa Cruz and Felton said, we'll see that and raise you one. And they built a tunnel under Mission Santa Cruz. They really did. So here's an aerial view. You can see Pacific Avenue on the right, and there's the Mission. And they built a tunnel underneath it. And there's the portal on the north and south end of this thing, and it's still being used today by the Roaring Camp group. How crazy is that? Like, really? But think of the modeling possibilities. You got a tunnel here, portal here, you got a tunnel portal here. You got this area that you want to get around this weird curve because you got this huge post in the basement. Aha! That's the Mission Santa Cruz up there, moving right along. And again, those CF7s, and that's that CF7 coming out of the south tunnel. All right, consolidation. Santa Cruz and Felton was merged into the South Pacific Coast. South Pacific Coast, of course, was a forerunner of the SP, but they also bought up the Coastline Railroad, kinda, and the Santa Cruz Railroad. So Santa Cruz Railroad, Santa Cruz and Felton, South Pacific Coast, not originally part of the SP. The Coastline Railroad, I'm going to tell you in a minute, was actually a wholly owned SP company, but they all became part of the SP eventually. 1905, 1917, another one of these weird things. Ocean Shore Railroad was running from San Francisco to Pacifica, and then from Santa Cruz to Davenport. If you know a map of Santa Cruz of California, that means they had a gap of about 20 miles that they hadn't figured out how they were going to connect it. But by golly, we're going to run a railroad from San Francisco all the way to Santa Cruz. Well, now we're going to get through Devil's Slide or any of those other things, but we're going to make it happen. The Coastline Railroad was going to go the other way from Santa Cruz up to San Francisco. That one, again, from this slide, wholly owned by the SP, but you weren't supposed to know that. So they were built side by side from Santa Cruz up along the coast to Davenport, where there is now a defunct cement plant. See what the slide says? The same developer / builder was building both lines at the same time under contract to the Coastline Railroad, AKA South Pacific, and the Ocean Shore Railway / at the same time. So you've got two crews from the same company competing to build rail lines for competing railroads. Today, if you travel that area, the old Coastline Rail right-of-way is still there. You can see it because there's still rail, except where the sand dunes have covered it. You can still find most of the Ocean Shore Railroad right-of-way, but all the track, all the ties, and all that is all gone. But it's interesting. Sometimes, I know Barry and you guys have been up there before. Sometimes they're maybe 10 feet apart, and other times they're a couple 100 feet apart. It just varies. It's really wild. Okay, so that's what we had at that point. 1888, we got this going on. But suddenly, 1930, this happens. So what happened? Lumber stopped. That's why we went up to Boulder Creek. That's why we went up from Aptos into Loma Prieta. Most of the lumber activities went away by 1930. So we've kind of contracted a little bit here. Then 1940, what happened to San Jose? Well, the Santa Cruz and Felton did not build the line from Felton across the hill to San Jose that was the ocean shore, excuse me, the South Pacific coast coming across the hill. Landslides, mudslides, fires, all sorts of other problems. The SP, once they could, said, we're done. We're not doing this. A lot of people say, oh, it's because of World War II. It had nothing to do with World War II. But shortly after World War II broke out, they had some really torrential rains that washed out a lot of the line, and they were allowed to abandon that line. Shortly after that, in the late 40s, mid to late 40s, Lexington Reservoir was built. I'm going to show you a picture of Lexington Reservoir. So that snaky line you see in there is Highway 17. It is the highway from Santa Clara Valley, AKA Silicon Valley, across the hill to Santa Cruz and Monterey Bay. And by the way, at the top, that's Monterey Bay. That's Monterey Bay that you see out there with the fog over it. So that's Highway 17. To the left of Highway 17, you cannot see it in this picture. I can, because I know exactly where it is, but it's really hard to show you, is actually the old right-of-way for the South Pacific coast. Well, when they built Lexington Dam, they covered up all the right-of-way going through there. It is a very steep, almost, it's not a switchback, but it almost feels like a switchback from Los Gatos up to the top of Lexington Dam, going back and forth, curving and so forth. I mean, the speed limit on that highway is 55, but in that area it's down to 35 on some of those curves. It's so curvy in there, and it's 4-lane highway. Okay, but they could do that because it's cars and trucks. The railroad, of course, couldn't. It went right through where Lexington Dam is gone. So no more railroad. Okay, and then the Western States Atomic Vault was also built. Don't get too excited now. So they actually took one of the tunnels, and depending upon when you're looking at the history, this was either Tunnel 4 or Tunnel 5. Why did Tunnel 5 become Tunnel 4? Because they daylighted one of the tunnels further along, and then they renumbered the tunnels. How goofy is that? Okay, you know, but they did. So you can see a car on the bottom picture there. This is from the Santa Cruz Sentinel. Okay, but they actually closed out this tunnel, and they built a structure on the front with guards and big old doors and everything else, and then they open it up and cleaned it up, and you can see the walkway here on the right where this guard is carrying a box of whatever through the thing. Once that was built, that just really, that and Lexington Dam, you're never going to put a railroad up through those hills again. So one of the reasons I add this in here, not just because it's one of the nails in the coffin putting railroad in there again, is because my grandfather actually worked in here. He worked in there starting from the very beginning. That is not a picture of Grandpa Armbrust, okay? But I remember as a kid going up there and visiting and spending the day with Grandpa Armbrust while he worked up there. Now, Grandma Armbrust also worked up there. She worked for an insurance company. Stored inside here is not atomic weapons. It's a vault to protect against atomic bombs. So what did you find in there? A lot of insurance and other financial records, and a lot of original Disney films. Okay, all in these little cages in here. It was interesting when you walked in the front door, it's like, oh, you know, just a regular building here. And then you get in, there's these guys in uniform with their little hats, they carry a pistol, and ooh, wow, this must be official. And you walk further in, I remember this from when Grandpa and I went to work in the morning. There was this big safe door that you've seen in the movies. This thing was massive. And, you know, you have to turn the thing this way and turn it that way and turn this big thing. It's like, you know, like a steering wheel on a ship, you know, turn it this way and that way and everything. And then, you know, pull this lever and then pull this other lever and then ka-chunk, and he'd open the door. Like, man, that's cool. You know, it's like, to a little kid like me at 10 years old, it looked like it was 12 feet thick. Well, it's probably about a foot thick with all these gears and everything. It was impressive. Nothing's being stored up there now. It's been sold and sold and sold. It's not open anymore. It's pretty cool. We'll probably have this somewhere on the layout as well. But anyway, kind of cool. Now, in 1980, see that little blue line between Santa Cruz and Felton/Olympia? That's when the Roaring Camp Group bought that part of the line, which is the original Santa Cruz and Felton Railroad. Okay, bought by those guys. So Roaring Camp Railroads, then the main line, if you will, using the CF7s, is the Santa Cruz, Big Trees, and Pacific. And that's that picture I showed you before of that coming through that south portal, that south tunnel portal under the Santa Cruz mission. Okay. And now, whoa, what happened? That red line now stops at Watsonville, just north of Watsonville. So around about the early 2000s, Santa Cruz County bought the line from the Union Pacific. Union Pacific, of course, bought SP. That's why they got this. They ran it for a while and then said, yeah, we're tired of doing this. You know, most of the industry is gone and we don't want to do this anymore. County Santa Cruz said, we'll buy it and we'll develop it and we'll have light rail and we'll have this, that, and the going. And like any government organization, they did such a good job that the infrastructure is in such a state now that you can't run anything more than a rail car across it. And by rail car, I mean, you know, one of those push-pull hand cars, okay? That's about it. They're honestly, most of the bridges are now rated so poorly that you can't even put a truck on them, okay? A high rail truck on them. Can't even do that. How about that? They are rebuilding the line now. New people in government and so on and so forth. They want to put this rail line in. We'll see what happens. Eventually, we hope that that's going to happen. We'll see what does happen. Okay, so right now, the way it is, Roaring Camp is working fine. They've got Roaring Camp and Big Trees up there, the narrow gauge. You got Santa Cruz, Big Trees Pacific doing beach trains. And honestly, at one time, they were hauling stuff up to the building supply store and lumber mill that were up in the Felton area. They were doing some other stuff in Santa Cruz. And then St. Paul and Pacific, under the guise of Progressive Rail, pulled the GP15-1 out of there and said, hey, you know what? You got these two CF7s sitting here at Roaring Camp. Why don't you paint those up and just do that? So St. Paul Pacific is actually the contractor to the county, but they have subcontracted, if you will, to the Roaring Camp group, a private group, who's actually doing all the movement. So it's kind of parallel to what we thought we'd do. What if? So that's the history stuff. But what if? And this is kind of what Fred imagined all the way back to when he was about 15 years old. What if the SP had sold the Santa Cruz Branch from Watsonville Junction all the way out, somewhere pre-1980, maybe as early as 1965. The infrastructure of the right-of-way was owned by County Santa Cruz. It was wholly owned by a subsidiary of the Burlington Northern. You know, the BN was doing stuff in those days, and they had some of those small railroads out there that they rebranded. You could tell it was really a BN, but it was totally branded as something else. And it's managed by a small group of local private investors, including the folks from Roaring Camp. What if they did that? So what we think we're going to model is this, and this is kind of a straight line diagram of from Watsonville Junction out to Olympia, which is where there's some sand and gravel. One of the things I'm going to do is, or we're going to do, is very similar to what Jim Providenza did on his line. Now, his line, the Santa Cruz Northern, is a little bit earlier than ours. It runs from San Jose across the hill and actually stops modeling in Felton, but supposedly runs all the way into Santa Cruz. He moved the Davenport cement plant up into the hills because it's just, there's only so much room and so forth in a basement, or in his case, a garage, in our case, a basement, and to put the Y in there and model that and so forth. So we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna move Davenport into the mountains. If that hurts your feelings, too bad, we're doing it anyway, okay? Here's some of the industry that you might find along there. There's a lot of stuff to keep us very busy just on the Santa Cruz Branch. That's what I'd like to do. In reality, we don't have the room for Aptos, and we really don't have the room for Santa Cruz proper and West Santa Cruz. But in West Santa Cruz, what I'll probably do is move Lipton and Wrigley into Santa Cruz proper. And what we might do, and then get rid of the generic produce plant and instead call it Green Giant. I don't know, but this is kind of in the working stages right now. That's still a lot of industry. Some of that may disappear as we get closer to actually building that out. So anybody notice the last one under Santa Cruz? Yo-Yo-Dine? Yo-Yo-Dine obviously never existed. It's fictional, right? Okay. Buckaroo Banzai fans? Nobody? Oh, man. So there's the logo. There's the logo that we have created. This never existed. Santa Cruz and Felton never had a logo to begin with. So one of the people I worked with in Humana and I created this thing, and Jennifer did a great job of doing it. And where did that logo come from? Well, it came from all of those. Okay. You can see the obvious influence from the from the South Pacific coast. You see the obvious influence from the Southern Pacific lines, but we decided to retain the red because that kind of honors what's really in existence with Roaring Camp, Big Trees, and Pacific, and the trees because of Big Trees and Pacific. Why 5 trees? I'm guessing neither Ron, Robin, nor Barry know that answer. There are 5 districts within the county of Santa Cruz. That's what we're telling you. In reality, Jennifer and I found that out later after we designed the logo, and we said, good thing we did 5. Now we got a reason for having 5 trees because it looked good. Okay, cool. Shh, don't tell anybody. So what would this stuff look like? Well, as I said, a lot of Burlington Northern influence here that kind of almost sort of looks like a BN locomotive that's kind of been relettered. But, maybe we'll throw the logo out there. Maybe we'll make it color. And because, this is really a Penzi Jeep, and we're going to run short hood forward, we probably ought to flip that horn around. Instead of being that way, probably ought to flip it around. So that's probably a good thing. But it's kind of, maybe it'll look kind of like this. Box cars. This is actually the design of one of the box cars that I super detailed for the Cars Achievement Program certificate. Well, I'll tell you what, if that doesn't look incentive per diem, I don't know what does, But I have a theory that BN management took a look at this and said, what are you guys doing? All that white, that's going to be a nightmare to maintain. Make that sucker all green. Okay, a lot easier to maintain, Cascade green. And Santa Cruz and Felton so the next batch was that. Santa Cruz and Felton negotiated when they said, well, we really like that color logo. So we might do that as well. Okay. Darcy, do you know what this is? Kind of. Do you know where it's located? Queensland. Okay, Queensland. So this is the Australian version of an RDC, locally home built, actually. And my theory is, as they started phasing these out in Australia, that instead of putting them in storage for 20 years to bring back, that they might have shipped a couple off to the Santa Cruz and Felton to use in their light rail endeavors in the late 70s, early 80s. So I have some scratch building or kit bashing to do, which will be kind of fun. Good news is Hugh Williams actually has some line drawings out there. And even though it says copyright and drawn and so forth, the license on this is free to share. So we're cool with that. So don't anybody go, oh, it's copyrighted. No, we're good. We're good. So what would it look like in Santa Cruz and Felton colors? That, or maybe that. We can play with it a little bit, be kind of fun, And of course you have to have a caboose. So there you go. And we actually do have a caboose, one caboose built so far. It's not exactly like this. Instead of the logo on there, it says safety first or safety always or something like that. But other than that, pretty much like that. So that's a quick run through some history, some what we think we're going to do with the railroad. Kind of gives you an idea of what we're planning for the basement. And by the way, there is, as far as we know, no piece of rolling stock or locomotive power or anything remaining from the Santa Cruz and Felton, but the Santa Cruz Railroad actually has one piece remaining, and this sucker is sitting in the Smithsonian. You can still see it today. So that's kind of cool. It never actually ran on the Santa Cruz and Felton from Santa Cruz up, but it did run along Santa Cruz Branch. So from Watsonville Junction up to Santa Cruz. All right, and that ends what I have to present to you guys. Questions? Everybody's so quiet. And Mike?
A lot of information there.
A lot of information.
Yeah. And mostly all new to most of us.
I would think mostly new to most of the guys, yeah.
With the inference here that this could be a whole lot of BS here, buddy.
It could be, except as I said, I got this stack of books that if I put it one on top of the other would be higher than this table. It's all there. And you can go online and read all this stuff too. But thank you for that, Mike. I love you too. Carl.
Why did you pick 1981?
Why did I pick 1981? The biggest reason is it's after the BN has been created. When did the BN come into place? in the mid 70s, somewhere there. Okay. What else is in 81? We're at the height of the incentive per diem boxcars, and we still have cabooses. And honestly, those are the big reasons. I could probably move it a little earlier, a little later. The last reason is the traffic on the Santa Cruz Branch was still sufficient enough to support a thriving Class 3 railroad. Once we get to 1990, not happening. Yep. And if we go pre-70, well, pre-75, really, we don't have incentive per diem boxcars, and we don't, we might or might not have the BN and so forth. So 81 sounded like a good stopping point. And there's a couple of things I want to do in Northern California with the McLeod Railroad that 81 is a good mark on the wall as well. Although, again, kind of like Mike said, I could fudge that and you guys would never know the difference. Kind of like I've told Steve Lasher when we've talked about some SP stuff. He says, that didn't exist in 81. I said, who's going to know here in Louisville besides you and me, Steve? He goes, well, point taken, but I'll know.
Fred?
Yes.
I know that you're a big fan of IPD cars.
Yes.
Do you intend to model, a full flower of those? And was 81 about the high point of the IPD?
It was starting to drop off at that point, Rick. And if you drill into those cars, you'll actually see that they were built 77.
Yeah.
So that's the build date on those cars. So we will have a few on the railroad, but we won't have hundreds and hundreds because it doesn't make sense to have hundreds and hundreds. If I had 100 of them, we wouldn't be able to move anything. But we'll have a few floating in and out. Yep. If you ever go to Bob Weinheimer's, you may find one on the Pennsylvania Southern, and a couple other railroads here and there. I actually have photos of a Santa Cruz and Felton in that. Wait a minute, let me go back here. In that paint scheme on Bob Weinheimer's railroad, being spotted at 87 lumber.
Yeah.
Y'all remember why he calls it 87 lumber? Because it's HO scale. Cool. All right. Anybody else? Any questions? All righty. Well, thank you very much. I think that wraps it up, and we'll go ahead and Ron, with your okay, we'll just shut down the meeting. Ron says bye, everybody. All right. We'll see you. Good night.